What's going on, guys? Andrew of Newbark Gaming back here, and today we're going to be talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains episode 89. Now, this concludes our two-part duel between Soulburner and Windy, with Soulburner end up winning the duel, which was probably pretty predictable. And the way in which he does so is pretty predictable as well, and that he ends up doing XZ summoning, which is something he hasn't done before, but this goes pretty much in line with the pattern we've been seeing out of the show, which is one of our main characters gets backed into a corner. How do they dig themselves out? Well, they use a summoning method they haven't used before, and then everything's kind of turned around, their opponent acts all surprised, and the duel ends in their victory. And I'm not necessarily opposed to that, in that once they use said new summoning method, like in the case of Soulburner being XZ summoning, that can then be a regular part of their strategy, which adds some more intrigue to their dueling, in that when they're going into a big monster, it doesn't have to be a Link monster every time, then it can go these other ways, like Fusion and XZs, right? So that can add some nice variety to things, very much one of the things I liked about Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5. Once more, not entirely opposed to it, it's just, it is getting pretty predictable, but there's only so much you can do to avoid predictability in a show like this. Plot armor, after all, is really a thing. So in terms of my overall thoughts on the duel, this got moving really quickly in this episode. I mean, obviously it started last episode, but before even the opening theme of the show plays, we see Soulburner down to 100 life points, and in a very iffy circumstance in terms of the duel, which was kind of cool to see. It just shows that they're trying to keep a good pace, not letting any of these duels drag on too long. Mostly okay with that. I just don't like it when they end up cutting out plot points, which so far they haven't been doing too bad of a job of. But the more interesting part of the duel, other than the pacing in my eyes, was the fact that both sides kind of played each other a little bit, and the way in which they were playing each other was individualized to their opponent. For example, Windy manages to play Soulburner. You can see that Soulburner, in terms of this duel, has kind of this quiet confidence about him, and Windy's been acting as this kind of exaggerated character with a lot of quirky personalities the whole time, acting on what Soulburner's observed on him and his quiet confidence. He kind of freaks out and makes it seem like he's about to be defeated when Soulburner manages to line up Salamangreat, Heat Leo in order to have 3 attacks. Windy's like, no, you can't do this, this is going to defeat me and everything else, and then Windy's just kind of luring him into a trap to get below 1,000 life points, but still be alive, so that way he can go on to use Storm Access, which we'll get to that part in a minute. But it was sort of individualized and tailored to the way that Soulburner likes to duel, what his personality was, and the way in which he views Windy. Going to the other side, Soulburner and Flame do essentially the same thing to Windy. They take advantage of the fact that Windy has a superiority complex when it comes to the Ignises, in that when Soulburner finds himself back into a corner, he's got a card he's about to set. He and Flame end up arguing about it. Flame's basically telling him, hey, look, Windy's entire strategy is based around popping all of our back row cards, doing burn damage as a result, and we're already in a predicament. You have to be extremely careful with the way you're using your resources. Maybe you shouldn't set that card. And Soulburner's like, yeah, you're right, I'm gonna set it anyway. And it turns out they were just playing Windy, and Windy falls straight forward. He ends up popping the card, but they wanted it in the graveyard in order to be able to activate its effect. And once more, individualized to Windy because it's playing off the fact that he believes AIs to be better, so he thought that it was Soulburner who made a mistake in that argument. He's acting on that instinct, and then the card ends up going to the graveyard. Soulburner and Flame are able to turn it around from there. One thing that kind of struck me about this duel, that I don't know if the writers did this on purpose or not, but let's take a second to appreciate the fact that Windy mostly uses a burn strategy with his deck, and Soulburner, who's his opponent, is the one with the fire deck. So the fire deck user is getting burned. A little bit of a puntastic thing going on there. Anyway, let's get into the fact that Windy manages to use Storm Access, right? Because that is kind of a big plot point that's been going on here recently that they brought up from time to time, and that is that skills are supposed to only be usable within a speed duel, yet now we've seen a few different characters use them during a master duel, those characters being Bowman and Windy respectively. Now, what's consistent about those two? Well, they're both on the side of the AIs, and they're both essentially a form of Ignis. Bowman, while he's supposed to be this more hybrid, superiorly developed form of an Ignis, he still is more or less based around the Ignis model. Windy outright is an Ignis. And so that seems to spell out, to me at least, that Lightning can probably use a skill during a master duel as well, which makes him all the more threatening of an antagonist, considering the fact that he's already taken out 2 of the identifiable characters on the side of our heroes, being Spectre and Blood Shepherd respectively, without ever touching his skill or even coming close to implying that he's going to use it. Which means, imagine him with the skill, how powerful he can be. He's essentially keeping this key card to his deck, this key strategy of his, in his back pocket that he hasn't even needed to touch yet. And I think it could catch one of our characters off guard as soon as he does that for the first time, and could easily lead to Lightning racking up another win, thus making him actually one of our more formidable antagonists within Yu-Gi-Oh! One of the ones with a better dueling track record if he has 3 wins against all nameable characters. So that's kind of neat to note. But the other thing that stands out to me is if it's the Ignis relationship, like the fact that they are Ignises, that allows them to use their skills during a master duel, what's to prevent some of our main heroes from being able to use it at some point as well? After all, they're dueling alongside of an Ignis, and they're just as tied to the Cyberse world, which is tied to linked Vrains, as the other Ignises are. So if Windy and Lightning and Bowman could all do it, what's to prevent Aqua, and Flame from being able to do it as well? In addition to that, when we're looking at a duelist like Playmaker who has this linked sense thing, which so far we haven't necessarily been able to see anybody who can replicate that ability other than Revolver or something comparable, we don't fully know the extent of what that grants him power to. So perhaps if you combine that with the fact that he is working alongside maybe Playmaker is going to be the first human that we see manage to use a skill during a master duel. Sorry about my voice changing a little bit there, got something caught in my throat. Anyway, proceeding right along here, we also have Revolver in this mix who has access to that link sense thing. So once more, not knowing the extent of that, maybe we could even see him use it at some point. They seem to be gradually breaking down this barrier of skills only being a speed duel thing, which I think is kind of a neat plot element as long as they continue to integrate it in an intriguing fashion the way that they have done so far. So let's move on a little bit into what exactly Windy got out of Storm Access. You got a monster called Storm Rider Flagship Bahamut Bomber Custom, which continues along with the meme that sometimes Yu-Gi-Oh card names just have way too long of names. Like, if you've seen on the cards how small that text box is for the monster name, putting something like that in there means your font is really freaking squished and tiny, which is just weird to think about. But as for the monster itself, it's got a powerful and kind of unique effect in that it allows him to turn one of his opponent's monsters into being treated as a continuous spell card, a la like the Crystal Beasts when they're destroyed, which is something that we don't really see very often, if at all, in Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's kind of a neat form of spot removal, looking at it from the perspective of someone who plays the card game, and that it prevents your opponent from getting cards into the graveyard, which, as we saw with Soulburner's deck, sometimes can be very beneficial to your opponent. If it's locked into the spell and trap zone, a lot of times people don't have a ton of ways to necessarily pop their own spell and traps. So if it's a card that, hey, this is good on the field and it's good in the graveyard, I'm relying on its floating effects, in that when it goes to the grave, I'm going to get some more bonuses out of it. Oh, now it's stuck in my spell and trap zone. That kind of sucks. And in the case like what Windy was dealing with, where he was dueling an opponent who uses equip spells, it's going to remove those equip spells as well, send those to the graveyard. So it's kind of a neat form of removal. I like the fact that they're integrating that. It's adding some variety to the card choices that we're seeing. Now, Soulburner does manage to turn things around here. He pulls off the XZ summon. And one thing I want to point out about Soulburner's XZ summon is this sequence that he does, I think, is probably my favorite animation I've seen in the entirety of this show so far. There's kind of some sparkles going around him as he's going to pull out the card and play it for the first time. There's a lot of red data streaks going around and moving in such a fashion that's just really awesome as he's building the overlay network. I can't really think of the greatest way to describe it, but go back and watch that scene. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. It looks absolutely beautiful. I hope whatever animator they had working on that, they definitely give him some nice props for it. Not that the rest of the show hasn't looked good, but this scene in particular really stood out to me. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the aftermath of the duel a little bit here. And that's that, first off, Flame and Soulburner kind of lecture Windy a little bit on the fact that, hey, you tried to trick us, we successfully tricked you, you kind of tricked us and such, but we were able to overcome our limits more. Why is that? Because we had a friend by our side in our partner to be able to push our limits. And that's something that goes right in line with a lot of the lessons Yu-Gi-Oh! Tries to teach its audience. And I think it makes a lot of sense, and in some ways, part of me actually kind of feels for Windy, because despite the fact that he keeps criticizing Flame for having a partner, in essence, Windy has a partner himself in Lightning, yet Lightning essentially gives up on Windy as soon as he's not useful to him, or as soon as Lightning has to go really out of his way to protect him. Lightning's words when Windy starts to disappear to data and is calling for his help in this episode are, "There's no cure for the foolish." And that to me is just ridiculous. I mean, Windy's one of Lightning's allies who's worked alongside of him loyally, yet Lightning's just willing to throw him to the trash. And it actually creates a situation where Flame ends up taking Windy's data, which is interesting to me because Flame has never really struck me as being angry against Windy. And on the contrary, seems rather disappointed in him, almost like a master to student type of thing, or somebody who's dealing with one of their friends that they see has started to take a wrong path, but is trying to see them through and hope that one day they eventually come around. And perhaps that's the route that Flame's going here. After all, I did take the data. Maybe eventually plans to try and revive Windy. At which rate, maybe we see Windy pull an Aporia and end up fighting alongside of our heroes. That could be really cool to watch, especially as emotionally driven as Windy seems to often be. I could see him getting pretty angry with Lightning, the fact that Lightning just let him die, essentially. That could be a neat little plot route to see things get explored, but I don't necessarily think we're going to go that way, but just an idea. So let's go ahead and move on to a little bit of an episode preview we got at the end of the closing theme of this episode. And that's going to be that Bowman says something along the lines of trying to leave everything to him. Now the question then becomes, who is the audience with what she's speaking to? Is he speaking to Lightning, that way he doesn't lose the last remaining ally he has, and that Haru and Windy have now fallen, and he's trying to protect Lightning? At this point, he's saying, you know, I'll take care of the rest of Playmaker's team, you just be kind of by my side in case anything starts to go awry, because he does believe himself to be the most powerful of the duelists on Lightning's side. Or the way it's worded to me, and the fact that he has kind of established his bond with Haru, come to understand it a little bit more, even though Haru's now gone, is perhaps Bowman starting to get a better understanding of humanity, and maybe he's starting to see some of their value more, at which rate, part of me almost wants to believe that what Bowman's going down with this route is, yeah, Lightning, you created me, but I'm starting to see beyond these horizons that you initially locked my view into when it comes to how I view humanity, view the Ignises, view this overall battle as a whole. My experiences have led me to broaden how I think about things. And with that being the case, maybe Bowman's trying to tell everybody to leave it to him to kind of find a peaceful compromise. After all, Bowman theoretically is this sort of human-AI hybrid, right? So wouldn't he be one of the ideal candidates to see both sides? At least that's my perspective. I don't necessarily think that's the route we're going to go, because that makes things very complicated and kind of lopsides the playing field a little too much, and that if Bowman's trying to form some kind of a compromise, that essentially means you have Lightning being the main one looking for conflict still, which just makes things very weird in that he's the last one standing. Now, don't get me wrong, Lightning's a powerful duelist, but still. And one of the other things that kind of leans me into this theory a little bit is that Aui's telling Bowman she won't forgive him no matter what for what was essentially done to her friend. And that sounds to me almost like Bowman may have started off the conversation trying to compromise with her a little bit. Now, of course, that's not necessarily the way it's definitely going to go. Once more, I find this theory on the whole a little unlikely, just trying to point out what kind of led me to it. So that's going to wrap up my thoughts on this episode, guys. As per usual, be sure to let me know your thoughts, comments, theories, etc. in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If not, constructive criticism is always welcome. And I'll catch you guys next time with some more Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains news, reviews, and whatnot.